One of the things that we did previously was had students working in a unit of study, the launching unit, and students would then take a piece from beginning all the way through their draft, what they could do independently. And as you know, it took a few days for students to get a piece together. And we asked that teachers not confer with students. We wanted to see what can students do on their own. But still, really, it was allowing for time for the development of ideas. Teachers could continue with the mini lesson. And it's really not seeing exactly what they can do independently. And really, with on-demand writing, and this is from the words of Lucy Calkins, it's a writing a student can simply produce on a familiar form of writing that's quickly and absolutely independently, and it's also during a short period of time. And there's several reasons for wanting to see what kids can do. Obviously, we need to see what do they have a command of, what do I need to work on with them, and also doing the on-demand assessment in this form is a real world skill. We all have writing that we have to do, responding to an email, and oftentimes it's having to have a quick turnaround. So, and thinking in your jobs as educators, there's lots of things that you have to have a quick turnaround that involve written communication. So it's very important that we start helping kids with this process. Some of the benefits when we look at growth-wise for students, they're learning how to get off the mark, as Donald Graves would say, very quickly. In his work, he talked about the importance of doing quick writes. You can almost think of an on-demand writing as that. However, it's not just quick, it's seeing what a students could do in completing a full draft of a type of writing that's familiar to them. Another benefit for doing it on demand is that kids get in the practice of doing, as Lucy Calkins says, kind of flash draft writing, if you will, in her new units of study that she has put out that are aligned to Common Core. They have on-demand assessments as a key part of their instructional practice. And a lot of their homework activities are, okay, we're going to collect some ideas about essays. I want you to go home and write quickly flash draft, do a paragraph that's another development of ideas about your central idea. So the more that we can do that for kids, they're going to feel more comfortable. Anytime we practice something and we have coaching with it, we get better. And the coaching for teachers comes after the assessment. They can say, look what you did in this writing, this was really well, and this is what you did on your own. And now here's an area where we can grow. And the bottom line is we can't have on-demand writing because our students do have it in fourth grade. It can't be a one-time performance. So if we start this early and we are starting this with second grade, this is going to be something that kids are very comfortable with. And they'll start to learn how to be able to get their ideas down quickly and put them in an organized manner. And the reason that we're wanting to do this kind of assessment is our goal is to improve writing instruction, bottom line. We know we have talented teachers and students that have interesting lives, and we want them to grow up to be effective communicators. And the bottom line is we know the rigor's there, and we have to provide instruction for students so that they can meet that increased rigor. One of the things that in Lucy Calkins' units of study, they actually administer an on-demand assessment to see what students already know, and that's what really we're asking you to do. When you think about the beginning of year district progress monitoring, students take a reading comprehension assessment that is to see what do they already know and what can they do independently when they're answering comprehension questions. And that's critical in identifying students who may need some additional assistance. Think of your beginning of year district progress monitoring for writing in the same manner. We're seeing what can a student do by themselves, and then what areas do they need help with. And that's where the instruction part will come after the assessment. But to increase that rigor is to continue to do this. It shouldn't be just a one-time thing. It's that you can continue to do this kind of writing where we're going to just take a class period. Maybe when we finish the unit of study, we have some days where we celebrate and there's an additional day for publishing. You can take one of those days and have a child write a piece using the same process that we used before, where they would take a personal narrative and write about it in a class period. And then being able to compare those two different writing samples, you'll be able to see growth. And that's the ultimate goal. Another benefit for doing this kind of writing is you truly have some artifacts that show what a student can do on their own. And when you have parent conferences coming up on October, in middle of October, I think it's the 10th, then you'll have the opportunity to share with parents, this is what your child did before we began the unit of study. Okay, here's another writing sample that they did at the end. It was completely on their own. The units of study that we do, we want to continue to do, and we want to give coaching on that writing. But really, there's a lot of work and effort that goes into that piece, and there's a lot of coaching that a student receives. And so it's truly not an assessment to see what can they do independently. They have had the benefit of a coach growing them and making them stronger. But that's not necessarily what they can do by themselves when they're giving opportunity to just write on a topic that's new to them. One of the other things is that you also have the benefit of being able to look at the student's writing and be able to set goals. You can say things like, you've really done a good job in varying your sentence beginnings. Now let's try to add a little bit more fluency with varying the length, having some complex sentences versus some short ones that get that kind of rhythm and flow that good writing has. Okay, we're going to take a look at how this is going to work, and I'm going to let Andrea Keith talk about this little section.
All right, good afternoon. These are the general administrative guidelines that you will find in the materials that have been sent out. Have they been sent out? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Basically, we're going to take a 45-minute class period for the writing assessment. Again, since it is the beginning of the year, if you find that students need additional time, you can do that on a student-by-student basis. You're the ones that know your class. Extra time can be provided that next day for individual students that might need a little bit more time. There is no minimum or maximum page requirement for this assessment, and the writing can be done on the student's own paper, so they don't need that star writing paper with the 26 lines. They can do it on their own paper in their writing notebook, whatever suits them the best. And teachers give the prompt at the beginning of the writing workshop on the day of the assessment. The students will select a topic related to the prompt. And the one thing that we want to stress is we want to see what students can do individually on their own. So there will be no coaching or conferencing. If they have questions about the directions or questions about what a personal narrative is, by all means you can talk about that with the students. But as far as coaching and conferencing with what they want to write, we just want them to write independently. And also, you can clarify the general writing expectations that you need to, watch your grammar, or this is how, what we do in a personal narrative. There's also going to be some things that we want you to do for when you observe the students. So during that 45-minute time, and there, if you look down on the right-hand side, y'all will see there's files, there's an on-demand observation chart, and we're also going to be sending this to y'all in an email. But this is a chart that you can have on a clipboard, and while the students are doing their writing assessment, you can take notes. You're going to observe things like starting and ending times, evidence of pre-writing plan, and there are 2 E's on this one. It is corrected on the chart. I just didn't get a chance to correct it on the PowerPoint. But if there's evidence of pre-writing, are they pre-planning? Signs of frustration. Some kids, you can tell when they're frustrated. You probably might know them a little bit the last 2 weeks of school. Some that might just be their facial expression when they're writing. So just making observations about that. Are they doing revision strategies? Are they doing editing strategies? And other observable behaviors. Are they using, what kind of pre-writing plan are they using? Are they using a graphic? Are they drawing pictures? Just want you to kind of observe what they're doing, and then I don't know if we have a picture of let's see. Yes, here's the sample observation chart. So you see the students listed on the left-hand side, and it's in basically just 5 minute increments. And the key down at the bottom, again, you use an S when they've started. You use a P if they're using the pre-writing planning evidence, an R if they're using revision, E if they're using some editing strategies, F about frustration levels that are exhibited, and then C once they're completed with the writing process. Again, this will be provided to you in an email, or you can download it from the file section here in the Adobe Connect room. And these are the directions that were sent out in the assessment packet. Okay. You just have students turn to the page in their student booklet, and you're going to say, today you will write a personal narrative or a true story about a time in your life. Write your best small moment story on a topic of your choice. Show everything you know about good personal narrative writing. When you plan, draft, revise, and edit your story during today's writing workshop. Follow along as I read aloud the directions in your booklet. And then they'll have, in box 1, write a small moment story about a time in your life. And then box 2, they'll have, in your personal narrative story, remember to, and these are things that good writers should do all the time. Write a beginning that hooks the reader. Use transition words to show what happened in order. Add rich details to help readers picture each scene. Write a strong ending, and then check your work for errors. And I think this same information is on the student information in the booklet as well. Again, this part you can clarify questions on, but when it comes to the actual writing, we just want there to be no coaching so we can get a true picture of where the student is as a writer.
Okay, one of the benefits of doing this kind of writing is that you have that opportunity to collaborate with your teammates at a grade level. Bring in your observation records. What did you notice about your students? You're really getting to know them and how they are as a writer. And then also looking at the writing samples. This can allow you to do some flexible regrouping with kids if you're seeing that they're having some similar needs. And then also what you learn about the students should inform what you're doing in your unit of study. You might see that your students are doing a pretty good job with writing complete sentences, but they're all using a very simple sentence pattern that's not varied. And so that might be something you note, I want to really work on that in this unit of study. And as we mentioned before, doing that check at the end, and it's great to share our writing, but I think we also want to continue with that vision of pushing kids on. So really consider utilizing that as an opportunity to have students try the same prompt. You can use the same prompt and just tell them they're going to write about a different topic. I want you to try it again, and this time I want you to show all that you've learned and increased in your skill level, the ability to write a strong personal narrative. And for the beginning of the year, since all students have, since kindergarten, they've had exposure to personal narrative, we are going to have our beginning of year assessment be a personal narrative. So the prompt that you saw is very general, and that should, you can clarify what a personal narrative is so kids understand, oh yeah, story about me, and put it in, very simple language. And certainly we would encourage you to talk with other grade levels, and that's something we've encouraged instructional specialists to help facilitate. So you can say, hey, in third grade I'm noticing our kids are coming in having a little trouble with this, and you can share that with second grade teachers. Okay, last week a group of principals and district administrators met, including myself, to talk about the challenges that we have when we look at our district writing performance on STAR, and that's in I should say grades 4, 7, 9, and 10. And overall, it's not where we want our students to be. And I know we've shared in the district time equivalencies, we've looked at the data, we're aware every grade level plays a critical part. But we're also aware that on STAR, the performance level descriptions as provided by TEA show that a 2, which we felt comfortable about previously, is not really meeting satisfactory performance standards. We know there's not an automatic failure. However, on the TEA performance level descriptors, A 2 is listed as basic and it's under the unsatisfactory. So with that understanding that it's not satisfactory and knowing that also revision editing, the multiple choice section of STAR play a key role in determining overall student proficiency in writing, it's that combined score. We had a very thoughtful discussion is how can we show that increased rigor for STAR, and talking about what does that look like also in other grade levels, and how can we align practices not only in grades 2 through 5, but also with our K1 grade levels as well. So as we met with the group of principals, the things that we looked at was aligning instructional practices, and we started with our writing rubrics. And our kindergarten and first grade team, they worked with us as well. The principals asked that we create a rubric together, and as a result of doing that, they decided K and 1 really, they needed a developmental rubric. But grade 2, that's where we first start giving grades, really need something that is that transitional piece. And so one of their recommendations that we all came in agreement together was to create what we're calling a transitional writing rubric. And you're going to notice that it has a grading scale also for grades 2 through 5. And I'm going to let Merle Quave talk a little bit about the process that she and the primary team worked on first when they were taking the developmental rubric, which really had a lot of the language that we used on last year's second grade rubric.
Okay, so how do you move forward? Sorry. Okay, one more. All right, here's the grades 3 through 5 rubric, and on this, you can see at the top of the page, you've got the different score points, 4 to down to 1, and the headings for that, the accomplished and the satisfactory, remain the same as STAR, but in the grade point 2 and 1, the STAR rubric says basic and unsatisfactory, and we've changed that to be limited, so parents understand that basic, parents might think that that's okay, but it really is not, as Julie mentioned earlier. So we changed that to read as limited, so parents understand that that is not an acceptable score. It's not good enough. We want them higher. And also in the grading on that section, the 2 is a 74, which is a D. And then, of course, the ones below that, 2 minus, is a 70. But the 2 plus, that's that paper that it's still a 2, and you would list it as a 2, but it's a little stronger 2. And if you've graded on this type of scale, you know, some of the 2s are, it's a weak 2 or it's a strong 2 or it's right in the middle of the road, and that's same with all of the score points. So that gives you some flexibility in there to show, you know, it is a 2, it is limited, but boy, it's moving towards the 3, so you could give that the 78. And also in the score point 1, we've given you some latitude there as well. You can, depending on where it is on that 1, you can grade it anywhere from 50 to a 69, and that's going to be up to your determination and understanding of what that paper really is. Is it getting close to a 2, or is it still just a very, very limited as a 1? And you can make your mind up with that. And also with the 4 plus at the other end of the spectrum, that's when you've got that student that's just really, they've done some revising. I mean, it's hard to get a 4 plus on a first draft. But when you're doing something, you've been doing some revising, then you can use that for later. And you say, well, they've really taken it and they've really blown me out of the water. And so that would be a 4 plus, and that would be your 95 to 100. And that they can make that choice on that as well. So, yes, so that includes that. Then the grade 2, just so you understand where the students will be coming from as they come to you eventually in grade 4, is you have the K1 developmental rubric, and we looked at that rubric and realized we had to combine that and merge that with some STAR-like language as well. but we kept that very active verbs in the beginning of it, and it also has the same descriptors at the top, of limited and very limited for the 2 and the 1 and the accomplished, and has the same scoring, grading scoring ranges as in the 3 through 4, or 3 through 5, sorry. Okay. And of course, in any of the writing that the students are doing, you can still use a 6 traits rubric. Like if you've been working on ideas or organization, you can use the 6 traits rubric to assess the writing for ideas or assess it for organization or word choice, et cetera, et cetera. So that's still, the 6 traits rubric is still a good assessment tool to use for any of the writing that they're doing during the year.
Okay, all right. And going back to the rubrics, just remember those rubrics were originally based on the grade 4 STAR rubric. Pretty much the language is the same, but in short phrases. And that we used to really align practices. And that one will be used on district assessments. So during the personal narrative unit of study, you need to be using that unit of study to give feedback to students. And we also will do the same grading scale, change the heading on the expository, it will be the same rubric. So when you're doing the essay unit, you need to use that unit to assess students. However, as Merle said, you can use the 6 traits rubric for other kinds of writing, and when you want to give specific feedback on some of the traits that you have been working on. Okay, and we have a couple of questions that, let's see, we have, will the students who receive modified tests have the same rubric? They'll have a rubric like the personal narrative right now, as y'all know, or may be aware that this will be the last year for a STAR modified test. And so it's likely that, and for special ed students, they would just be doing the personal narrative. The rubric language for STAR, for modified, is very similar to what the actual STAR is. So the rubric likely will be similar. And this just was something we had to create fairly quickly, and I'll tell you, we had a great group of individuals, so we'll have the time to visit and clarify with special ed. But it's all personal narrative, so that's the kind of writing that students will do at the beginning of the year if they take a modified district assessment. And then the other question, will the scoring for modified be different? That'll be something I'll have to ask the special ed coordinators. And thinking about this, we really have 1 year left with the modified assessments. That's a conversation that we have to have with the special ed department, to thinking about what's best for them. Okay, so those are great questions, and Andrea will have them, and we'll send an email to the special ed coordinators and then get that feedback out. We'll send that out when we send out this link. Okay, and as y'all know, really, when we were looking at this, it's raising the rigor for all, and thinking about the adjacent scoring model is now what STAR is using. And if you'll recall, there are 2 raters for every paper. They're added together, and that's where you come up with a sum score from 0 to 8. And that score for a 1 composition is added to, for example, the personal narrative is added to the expository. And there's just much more weight that is placed on the writing sample. And as you take a look at it, so here's a visual. We're going to have the same performance standards this year that we had last year. We're getting 1 more year to improve our performance. So let's say a child had a 1. There was a rater that on the first composition, which was a personal narrative, they had a 1. Both raters gave it a 1. So they end up with a 2 on their personal narrative. And same thing on their expository. They have 1s on both of those. When you add those 2 scores together, 2 on the 1 composition, 2 on the other, it becomes a total of 4 points out of a possible 16 points. We know that this writer is very limited, as the rubric says. And they likely have skills, they're not skilled in being able to communicate, or maybe they're writing for the wrong purpose, or they're not connected at all to the prompt. these children are very limited with their writing performance. Well, they would have to score on this year's standard in order to get to that combined raw score, which is a 23. They'd have to have 19 points out of 28 in order to meet the passing standard. And just note that while we have a combined score of 23, generally, if an administration is slightly more rigorous, it might be that the raw score is a 24. Or if it's a little less rigorous, actually, if it's a little less rigorous, then it would probably be a 22. But generally, this is the standard that was used last year, and oftentimes it's the same. Okay, so keeping that in mind, those writers are going to really struggle. And when we look at next year's performance standards, now the combined raw score of composition plus multiple choice goes up to 27. Look what happens to that same writer. They scored 4 total out of 16 points on the composition. Now they have to get a 23 out of 28. And for those writers, it's going to be very difficult. And this was the thought process that was really driving the instructional changes that we looked at and the recommendations from the principals. How can we communicate to parents that a 2, which on STAR says basic, which seems okay. A lot of parents would say, hey, that's okay, basics, back to the basics. But that's really not the language of STAR, is misleading, I guess, in that way, in thinking that it's satisfactory. And with what we've come to understand when we had a whole generation of students that were familiar with TAKS and that a 2 was okay, and it's really not. So that was a lot of the thoughtful discussion that we had with the principals that really goes into the rationale for why we need to make some changes. So with that in mind, we'll be sending out the district progress monitoring profile cards. And one of the things that you're going to notice that was a recommendation with principals, that we go ahead and reflect that combined writing performance. And one of the things they requested that is at middle of year and end of year, and I know 5th grade just does the middle of year with a writing assessment, but 3rd grade does middle of the year, 4th grade, of course, does the practice STAR test, the benchmark now as it's called. Students will have to meet the overall language standard, which is a combined score from both revising and editing and the composition assessment. Previously, we've had a standard for revising and editing, and then we had a writing standard. And what we're going to do is follow that same method that STAR uses to report our scores. Let me show you, this is just 2nd grade, just for you to be aware, because we're even previously at the end of the year of 2nd grade, students had 10 items on a revising and editing practice. But principals have asked that we go ahead and have them have a revising and editing assessment at mid-year. And of course, 2nd graders, they're more at the level of editing, capitalizing sentence beginnings and proper nouns and ending punctuation. So their middle of year assessment would be simply a simple editing piece. At the end of the year, we would expect a little bit more, like with word choice, that they could do with some revisions. So you can see how they have a combined score at middle of year. And I'm going to show you 3rd grade. So if you look at the beginning of year for 3rd grade, their writing sample, it's still showing a 2. We're using the 4-point rubric. And then, we assess the conventions within the writing sample. That helps us see what a student can apply independently. So we're not going to do a combined standard at the beginning of the year. Where it's going to take place is when at middle of the year. And you see 3rd grade at the middle of the year, there's a place to record the writing sample score that a child had plus the convention. So 4 plus 16 items on the revising and editing. Then that's added together for 20 points. You'll notice the district standard is a 14. And all of the district standards are at 17%, at or around 70%. So 14 out of 20 is 17%. The advanced academic performance is also around the same standard level that you see on STAR, which typically is about 85 to 87% for both reading and writing. So that's we have a score that shows their performance level. So that's the difference that you're going to see. And of course, at middle of year, third grade is doing a personal narrative and expository at the end. And same with fourth grade. You see the star composition at the end of the year is what you have the combined star, and it says must pass star. But you'll also see that same percentage weight, at the middle of the year for fourth grade, you have the practice CBA. Excuse me, not the CBA anymore, the benchmark. And then fifth grade, you have at the middle of the year revising and editing along with the composition. And one thing that fourth grade may have noticed is they're going to report their practice star test, the benchmark, on the 8-point range, because they actually have 2 people that rate the papers. But grades 3 and 5 will continue just to have the teacher score reported for that paper. Okay, we're going to give a moment for questions, and we want to thank you for participating. But we'll stay here for a few moments to answer any questions. So just please feel free to type those in the chat room. And if your questions are answered, please go ahead and feel free to log off and have a good evening. Okay, Kathy was asking, will we send out the profile cards? Yes, we sent them to principals this morning, so it's likely we can send those tomorrow. We did send the profile cards to principals, and we'll send them out in a teacher email group as well. Okay, well, thank you all. It looks like most of our questions have answered. If there are questions that you come across, do not hesitate to send an email. You're welcome to send to me, but also our coaches can answer the questions too, and sometimes they're a little faster to get back to you. So have a safe and good evening.